Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today I'd like to make a video discussing a book that I recently finished. It was published in 1989, and it's Education of a Wandering Man by Louis L'Amour. So there's a couple main um, attitudes, topics that were discussed in the book. Basically, it covers his life from being a young man in 1908 in North Dakota, which at that time was very much, and largely to some degree it is, still very much a frontier society. It's basically um, not very populated, not very developed compared to the different coasts in the United States. So it makes a bit of a interesting topic, and frankly, he entered the charity in about 1929, and of course, all of you are well aware that the Great Depression, that's when that occurred. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this book is because I'm thinking a lot about uh, open-mindedness lately. So in the book, it basically describes well, let me start. So he drops out of high school, I believe it was 10th grade, and he basically becomes a wandering laborer. So, in those times, according to him, which I have no reason to disbelieve, there were a lot of people who would seasonally work on odd jobs here and there, whether it be mining or working on a harbor or just different jobs. And these people also included folks we know as named hobos. Well, back then, the definition of those people was a lot different than we know of in popular culture. Uh, the hobo back then was sort of a wandering culture who they would tell a lot of folk stories, and although they didn't have a permanent residence, it was more like they kind of liked the lifestyle. It wasn't necessarily by choice because of mental illness or any of the other effects that commonly plague the homeless of these days. But back then, it was more of kind of a lifestyle choice. It was kind of like, I suppose, joining the circus. So there's a lot of folks, and there were even college students at that time who would embark on temporary jobs in order to, play football the next season. They would bulk up and work, do some hard labor, and just for the experience of it, because what these hobos, like I mentioned before, and even the college students would do is they'd ride um, on the massive railroads that had been laid during the Civil War era and in antebellum. That I mean, the railroads in the United States used to be absolutely incredible. We had more railroads in the United States than all the other countries combined, and so there are a lot of opportunities for cheap traveling that really wasn't too popular. I mean, it wasn't really common except for by boat in other nations. So a lot of people saw a lot of things, in particular before the Great Depression, that impacted a lot of ideas. So, uh, anyways, back to the main argument. So he talks about these people and he explains how a lot of their culture can only be learned by people who were in that time period because a lot of it wasn't written down. It was oral histories, similar to what you would see in some African and South American nations now with the indigenous people. And so it kind of brings up like you had to be there, but um, and that's why like if you're someone who doesn't practice um, the concept of open-mindedness, then frankly, you could be missing a lot of historical documentation, ideas, um, images that you're not going to be able to find in a book very easily, if at all possible. And so, basically, at this time, he went through and, although he had completed, 10 years of education and none more, he embarked on a journey of self improvement, of learning history, cultures, philosophy, all sorts of different topics from just reading books available at the time. And because of the transitory nature of this, it would be a few books at a time, but excuse me, over the course of a year, uh, one could cover a large amount of material in a very short period of time. I mean, I think he kept some lists of his early 20s of books he read, and easily 100, 100 titles would be passed. Some of this would be fiction, some of this would be, historian books, and especially local histories. Things like local histories, I think, are getting a little bit more attention now than they used to, but a long period of time where it was all about the great men. You had your Napoleonic figures, your Simon Bolivar, you had, your General Pattons and stuff like that, but the fundamental ideas were not necessarily explored. So, but now you have large amounts of regional history, particularly with things like the Ottoman Empire and the Mediterranean, that has had a very big new interest because of expanding information available based off of those climates and uh, other material that's become more widely available over time. A notable book about this was Mediterranean by let me see, I believe it's Francis Braudel. Braudel is definitely the last name, and this book was written in France in the 1950s at a time where there was a historiography debate between the NL schools, which, if I'm no expert on this, but I believe there's a basis very similar to the Frankfurt School. And then there was general historiography that was being pushed. So there was back and forth. Well, these micro-histories emerged from that time period. So this regional history became more focused. But what basically what Moore says if he wasn't so, you know, paying attention to opportunities to improve himself and uh, the vast literature that exists, that there would probably be many things that would not be clear to him. For example, you take the old Western historiography. There's many tales of Billy Dixon, Billy the Kid. These Bonnie and Clyde type figures who, I mean, back then you could actually speak to them. You could speak to an old man who said, "Oh, I remember old Billy," but that sort of oral accounts really weren't documented, not nearly as enough as it is nowadays. So if you go that open mindset, there's many stories you miss. And so why the heck am I talking about stories and open-mindedness and that kind of thing? Well, if you want to do anything creative, it doesn't really matter what it is. Um, could be writing, could be movie making, any sort of um, thing that has really been commercialized in this 21st century. Um, there's a lot of different um, avenues to develop these scripts, particularly now with a reliance and failure of new um, new ideas. Well, and frankly, this boils down to, in my opinion, of just people not getting enough experiences. I mean, people are inside a little too much. Now, I'm not in particularly a very rural environment right now, but just the idea of recording outside is, to a lot of people, is very not a pleasing endeavor. So, and so, open-mindedness allowed Lamore to progressively improve his writing abilities, in which, for those of you who aren't familiar, he is one of the best-selling authors of all time. I believe he sold over 500 million books. Um, People think of them as these pulp um, paperback, but there is plenty of subjects, anything from, you know, naval endeavors in Singapore all the way to um, just, like modern approaching the Utah path through the Oregon Trail, or just different things. And you came across these things because the experiences and ideas that one had emerged from experience. So it's very important to continually manifest that. Otherwise, you lose it. I guess it's kind of like the idea of, when you get older, you become kind of a square. Well, that's probably a little bit of a basis for that. So that's that. So yeah, the reason why the book was very influential is because not only did it provided a lot of books and ideas of these different time periods, the 1930s, 1920s. It also provided just some of the rough living a lot of people experienced back then that I think really does spur creativity in some regards, as long as it's not like a overarching, oh, you're always in this struggle. So I think when people go through events, war, famines, different things, you notice that a lot of major literature comes from these events, and it's almost like taking a negative thing and turning it into a positive thing. Well, people say, "Oh, well, is it worth it?" Well, it's not the point if it's worth it or not. It's the fact that it is what it is, and so experience is extremely important for the creative output of this thing. Another topic that's pertinent to it is the not the reliance on institutions, and this is kind of ironic as someone who's gone to college, but frankly, education is not a restrictive uh, element. You know, there are plenty of folks who had limited amounts of resources and yet still had remarkable achievements. Um, give an example, famously. So this is not a fair example because there was probably there was a lot of things going on genetically, but if you look at someone like Leonardo da Vinci, the guy didn't speak Latin at a time where Latin was the prominent uh, language of elite. He missed out on a lot of material, but you think about it. I mean, he, although he only completed 12 paintings, from my knowledge, he still had many, many impacts and observations that could only come from instigating, investigating different problems. It's all about the mindset in this. And so, and then the third major topic I want to talk about is the idea of the Western itself. So, in the United States, Westerns are not really respected how they used to be. Back in probably prior to the 1970s, Western as genre is actually substantiated. You had movies like True Grit, John Wayne, and different ideas, The Magnificent Seven, notably, which covered these topics with quite a bit of seriousness. But as they progressed, they became more over the top and bold. Well, eventually, nowadays, you go to a bookstore and westerns are kind of treated the same way that you treat a Playboy or a dirty magazine. Kind of hidden away. They're not really showcased. I mean, if you have a major author who comes, like, Zane Grey or something, or from the past, then sure, maybe there'll be some sort of spectacle they'll have. But generally speaking, it's not really a genre. And what I would encourage people to do is to take a look into genre because, frankly, it has a lot to offer. I mean, let's give an example. So with tabletop uh, gaming, a lot of that is world building and coming up with character developments that, frankly, you care about. Well, Western is kind of the same thing. You have to build society in a place where there really wasn't a lot of concrete society. There was society, but a lot of the people, for example, indigenous in the United States, they were not sedentary people. Apache, Comanche, very mobile people. They didn't build giant monuments and these, expansive buildings. So to a lot of those explorer guys, this was new territory, and thus a lot of challenges that people who settle the West experience as well. So with that in mind, it just gets important that there's a lot of cycles in history, and frankly, if you want to get into predicting the future, you know, people make fun of Nostradamus and stuff like that, but in all honesty, it's paying attention to what happened in the past that will give you a further insight into what's happening in the future. For example, uh, you have the issue with Afghanistan. You have a war that goes on for 20 years, and that the culture fundamentally of the region, divided by the Dari speakers, Pashto speakers, and other people in the area, were not respected. The area had been controlled under the Kabul government, Ghani, for some time. Yet the urban population is a very small part of Afghanistan. This is not a substantial portion. So therefore, when the United States chose to withdraw from such theaters of war, there was not a consensus nor a working with negotiation with the rural elements of the society. Well, when things such as the withdrawal date were modified from their original time, such as May, it basically angered them because in that part of the world, just like how it used to be here, word meant something. You know, very easily people could die over word not being respected in many cultures. So when you don't do what you're telling you to do, especially since you've been there 20 years, there's going to be problems. And so when the time came, it was very easy for groups like the Taliban and ISIS to promote themselves and say, hey, we're trying to kick out the invaders. You're welcome to join us. And, oh, we've changed. Sure, we messed up in the 90s, but of course we're going to improve now. Well, so we can see they're already breaking those promises. But the second thing with that, well, the Afghan government says it has 300,000 soldiers. Well, when there's no national pride in a nation that's had war for 4 decades, uh, relying on national pride at the expense of a very enthusiastic force is not going to allow you to maintain territory in a conspicuous situation. And so, one of the things that people don't realize is that the Ghani government never really tried to work with the former persecuted groups of Afghanistan. Uh, the Hazara people, who famously, one of them, I believe it was Lala, she was shot in the head by the Taliban for daring to have the audacity to go to school and get an education in the Western sense. And so she was punished for that. Well, in that society, the majority of people had seen no problem with that. They don't consider Hazara this in the same capacity as the majority groups there. So these are just issues that had been going on a very long time and had never been adjusted to and never been talked about in true sense. There's a big beetle. My leg's falling asleep. And so when you have that, you're not going to be able to form a proper political coalition. And thus, an ordinance, you're going to not going to be able to maintain a stable country. Similar things happened, and in Syria. You had I believe it was Shia minority, who, the Bashar al-Assad government and his father Hassan al-Bashar, who, um, they did not represent the majority of the people, and so you had a backlash from that. You also had, I believe, the issue in Iraq as well. You had not Mubarak, but the prime minister there, 2014. I forget his name, but essentially, what he had done is he had told his government officials, who were run by the minority politic, to crack down on the Sunni majority. And well, the Sunni majority has factions of it, like Wahhabism, that originate from Saudi Arabia, that were not conducive to being satisfied with current government structures. And so it was very easy for groups such as ISIS or the Taliban to rally among people. They say, hey, look, they're persecuting you because of your religious beliefs, because you're not a 12er or whatever the case may be. And so it's very easy to convince a lot of people who, frankly, had dealt with war for many years as well to support such radical groups. And that's part of the reason why we had this whole issue with the caliphate a few years ago. And so, but the thing is we have a lot of leadership now who don't have a proper education into these subjects. Well, you're going to spend $2 trillion on a war that you know nothing about the people's culture, and then you're going to wonder why the popular opinion is against you. Well, frankly, it's because it wasn't the correct course of action. And frankly, if you're going to get involved in that, you probably should know what you're doing before you commit troops. I mean, you watch any sort of, um, you watch any interviews with people like Joko and any other Navy SEALs who are involved in those operations. Frankly, is the you don't take action unless you know all the details, and if you do take actions, you better be playing to win it, and that's absolutely true. So yeah, the major elements of that, and so yeah, this the free-mindedness you're seeing this. Take for example, you have issues with getting people to take medical precaution for the current pandemic. Well, the thing is part of the reason why that's happening is because there's a lot of biased information online. Well, why is it so biased? Well, people like to hear easy solutions. They say, "Oh, well, it's because of this party. That's why everything's problematic." But truthfully, is people need to look at the science. You know, there's a lot of information out proves that these different solutions to the current issues are they're not causing major side effects or anything like that. So it comes to wonders, okay, where are these people hearing these information that it's so problematic? Well, it's because there's a big industry now that's emerged, just as there has been in other time periods, that is profiting on fear. You can convince people, oh well, if you get this certain medication, you're gonna die. Well, you can make some money because you say, hey, wait a minute, you keep listening to me because I'm telling you the truth. Give me money. It's very, very profitable. It doesn't matter what subject we're talking about. So, uh, just a concept, modern day, from a different subject. But yeah, anyways, education, water, very good because it talks about the transitory nature of things. And I feel a lot of people, they're looking for stability settlements. They're moving to cities in wide regards in different nations, and the truth that's not necessarily the best lifestyle. There's a lot of variation in these societies. You have everything from the desert plains of, the Mojave, all the way to Taklamakan to, I mean, these are even within deserts. There's plenty of variation. So, and it's interesting because we can learn a lot from these frontier societies. Take, for example, the the city oasis of Lulan in China. It had the oldest printed, piece of paper from 130 AD, discovered 40 years ago. It's been preserved 2,000 years within this desert environment because of lack of humidity and other factors that degrade, particularly parchment at that time. I believe it's what is it called? It's oh, I can't think of the term, but the old type of paper they used to use before pulp. So there's a lot of things that we can learn from taking the off-going path. And honestly, with the rise of institutional costs in the Anglo world, it's not just the United States. There's Canada, there's the United Kingdom, there's Australia, and these societies, the educational costs formally through the classroom is becoming more expensive. So I'm not saying that one should avoid these institutions because they definitely have their places, but I feel like there's a lot of other options that exist at this time, so people should take advantage of it. Right? Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.